Governor Lingle, General Lee, distinguished participants of the 8th Annual Asia-Pacific Homeland Security Summit and Exposition. Aloha. It really gives me great pleasure to introduce my Chief Executive Officer, Walt Havenstein. Walt is a 1971 graduate of the United States Naval Academy, almost said military academy. That would have been a big mistake, at Annapolis. Upon graduation, Walt was commissioned in the United States Marine Corps, where he served in a variety of command and staff positions. Walt served 12 years in active duty and continued to serve the nation in the United States Marine Reserves until he retired in 2001. Walt has worked in a number of corporations, serving in positions of increasing responsibilities. Walt joined SAIC in September of 2009 as the Chief Executive Officer. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Walt up to the podium.
It's a good thing he didn't say West Point. It's a thrill for me to be in Hawaii. I don't get a chance to be in Hawaii very often. It's especially a thrill to be with Governor Lingle and General Lee. The governor mentioned our relationship started through first robotics competition, but I think the thing that impressed me most about Hawaii is similarities with the state I'm from, which is New Hampshire. And you're thinking, gee, how could that be? Both relatively small states. Both states have about 1.2 million citizens. Everybody knows everybody. And although we don't call it the Aloha Spirit, I equate the Aloha Spirit in a fashion to what we have in New Hampshire, which we refer to as live free or die. Now, and I would simply say that I work in just outside Washington, D.C., and we could use a lot more Aloha Spirit and the civility that comes from the Aloha Spirit, as well as the live free or die spirit in Washington, D.C. So I come here with recognizing the similarities. Oh, by the way, I don't know of any Sheraton. There's only one Sheraton in New Hampshire. And I don't think you can go downstairs from the conference room into the swimming pool. I guarantee it's not next to the beach. This is a pretty unique environment. It's actually that unique environment that creates the challenges that we're talking about in this summit. And SAIC is certainly honored and delighted to be part of this summit this year as we prepare for APEC. As you, Governor, make your transition, and General, as you make your transition, I think one of the key factors in how effective APEC is going to be is the transition of your leadership, and I hope the governor and the incoming TAG take hold of the tremendous amount of work that you have all done in preparing the state to at least, frankly, to even be considered for this upcoming event. It is an enormous responsibility to have such a high-level national event here, and the preparations that are started by virtue of this forum and the previous 7 forums is tremendously important in developing momentum so that we are prepared for this event. At SAIC, we've worked with state and local governments, national governments around the world, frankly, in providing security and advice around security for events like this, to include the Greek Olympics, to include our presidential inaugurations in Washington, D.C., and a variety of other economic summits throughout the world. So I think we understand the challenges that we're all facing as APEC comes to Hawaii and the hard work that's involved. And I commend you again for using this forum as kind of the stepping off point for that activity and those preparations. I'd also like to thank the industry partners who are here and have been here over the last 7 years in supporting this summit. Some of them and their capabilities are on demonstration behind us. But I know what it takes for both local and not local enterprises to come and share their ideas in forums like this. As we know, meetings of global leaders and global organizations such as the G20, the World Trade Organization, and APEC provide a platform for groups to attract attention to their concerns and causes. Sometimes that comes in the form of mischief and mayhem. Sometimes it can come in the form of some very dire consequences. And key to the effectiveness of these events is the detailed planning and the sharing of information that goes into preparing for these events. And it is exactly that sharing and the enabling real-time communications that represents a vulnerability to events and organizations like this. While in many cases, street protests have been the most visible sign of these contrarians, cyber attacks have also been observed, and at some global events, as we've seen in the Pacific Rim just in the last couple of years, have had some, in some cases, pretty remarkable impacts on those events. We've seen a couple of instances in the last couple of years in Australia. We saw an incident not too long ago as we prepared for the G20 in South Korea, where not just the event itself was targeted, but individuals who were in the planning, and in many cases, some very senior leaders in those events were targeted for not just mischief and mayhem, but frankly, some very, very valuable intelligence information. It is reasonable to expect that similar things may be advanced during the preparation of APEC for next fall. Additionally, while it isn't directly a cybersecurity issue, we should consider the fact that social networking resources and communication platforms such as Twitter, not that I know anything about Twitter, that large numbers that have provided protest groups in particular with the means to create what we call flash mobs and control large numbers of previously disorganized supporters. And we've seen that in not just non-peaceful events, but in many, many peaceful events. Making use of these internet resources and smartphones, protest groups can present a formidable challenge for law enforcement. As you well know, cyber targets may include the websites and enterprise networks of APEC, key government agencies of APEC member countries, international companies, as well as computer resources for the host committee. And the state and university system of Hawaii, frankly, that's an integrated part of the planning for this event next fall. Now, that sounds a little far-fetched. I can simply tell you, one of the few things, there are two things I read every morning as a CEO. I read what we call the short report. That tells me how many shareholders are selling our stock short every day, because that gives you some indicator of stability of your company. For my SAIC colleagues, it's just fine, all right? And then the other thing I look at every day is our network security. How many attacks have happened within the last 24 hours on our networks? Not just those networks that are providing secure connectivity around the world for the work we do for the U.S. government, but frankly, all the networks that interface with our system, because it represents a fundamental threat to our corporation. And frankly, the day that we can't assure the integrity of our information is a strategic inflection point for companies like SAIC and many of the companies that are represented here today. I would also tell you that the U.S. federal computer systems that you will necessarily be using, the .gov, not just the .com, but the .gov, and in some cases the .mil networks, will also be targets as you build up for APEC. These attacks would likely be oriented at disrupting the event through denial of service or by using sensitive information about the events obtained through hacking to enhance the effectiveness of physical protests. So they use what we use, the systems we use to plan and prepare as information gathering nodes for them to plan and prepare what they want to do, whether it's in a physical sense, which most protests are, or it's in an electronic sense to disrupt our plans for APEC. Attackers could also use this opportunity to deface organizational materials, to distribute false information that appears legitimate in order to induce disorganization and embarrassment for organizers. I think we're all very, very familiar with nation and government-sponsored attacks. They get a lot of publicity, but I think it is also worthy to note that an awful lot of unaffiliated attacks happen every day. And I can assure you, they have impacts on planning and organizing for functions like the one you're about to undertake. I would suggest that you include as part of your overall assessment of security, assessment of the networks that you're going to be using while in the conduct of the event, but primarily in the planning of the event. And you should make the assumption that people are going to use those networks against you to whatever extent they want to, and hopefully it won't involve some of the things we saw this morning. And Rohan, I got to tell you, I'm just not used to coming into a meeting at 8 o'clock in the morning and start the day with decapitations. It's just not the way. We do some very sensitive things at SAIC, I got to tell you, but I don't get a lot of that. And but your point was very well made, and the point of getting up at 2 o'clock this morning or 3 o'clock, whenever it was, and walking down into the lobby and recognizing there's nobody there is also very, very well made. This is not an 9 to 5 kind of security mission you're on. This is a real deal, and it's going to start with. It is a 24-hour operation, and it's going to involve just about every dimension, both physically and non-physically, you can imagine, to get this right. I would suggest that when you think about your networks, think about layered defense, just like you do in the Guard and Reserve and the military. I would also think about a responsive plan that you test run a couple of times. I know we've worked together on tabletop exercises that historically have dealt with contingencies, but I think one of the contingencies you ought to want to think about is a cyber attack in some fashion that you want to be able to respond to and practice that before you get into the event itself. I know that a lot of you and a lot of work has gone into preparing for APEC 2011, and a lot more will. Unfortunately, the speed and the ubiquitous nature of modern communications represents not just an important capability as we try to share information around the world in preparing for this event, but it also provides a unique security risk, and giving it proper consideration would be wise. And let me just finish. I know this is it is a long way from Alton, New Hampshire to Honolulu, Hawaii. And those of us who do business in the Pacific Rim recognize the unique nature that Hawaii, the unique characteristics of Hawaii as a state, and frankly as a gateway to the Pacific for our country. That's not always well understood, especially back on the East Coast. And your comment, Governor, about the reason you do Asia-Pacific conferences, economic conferences in particular, in places like Hawaii, is because Washington is very Washington-centric. Frankly, it doesn't know much about Virginia or Maryland, much less, their view of the world, and especially of the ocean, is Ocean City, Maryland. And I can assure you that's a far away from Hawaii, and a far away from the Pacific Rim. So those of us who have the opportunity to work with you here understand what this state represents in terms of the economic outreach of the nation. The other thing it represents that is pretty unique in our country is demonstrated by the number of uniforms you see in this audience today. The high percentage of young men and women, and some not so young, men and women, that serve. So what I'm about to say to you, I would typically caveat, because very few places in our country where you had 500 people come to a meeting like this would have so many people in uniform. And that is, thank you. Thank you for your service, and thank you for what you do and what you and your colleagues do every single day for us. I know this state and its National Guard is probably the most complex collaboration of military guardsmen and civilian governance as we have any place else in our country. And so I think I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you for what you do every day. We have a lot of issues in this country. We got a lot of issues, right? Hopefully, one of the neat things about our country, on November 2nd, we all got a chance to take a grip at the bat and put a swing on it, see here's how we want it to be. We'll see what happens. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't work out, but we know in 2 years we're going to get another grip. The ability to have that grip at the bat every 2 years is preserved by those that are among us in uniform. And the day we're going to solve all these problems because we get a grip at the bat. The day we can't count on the 18 and 19-year-olds to serve us so selflessly, we really got a problem. Because that's not something you can vote in and out. All right, that is really the essence of the soul of this country. And I know there are a lot of folks here from outside the United States. Just bear with me for a second. We have to be willing to say thank you to those young men and women every chance we can. I know it's not necessary for me to remind you here in Hawaii, you know that. Other places in the country forget that. Inside the Beltway in Washington, we forget it all the time. I remind my colleagues at SAIC, as I did at BA Systems, one of the few things I regret about not being at BA Systems is I used to leave my condo every morning in Bethesda, drive north on Wisconsin Avenue, right past Bethesda Naval Medical Center. And it was a daily reminder to me, because of the kids in 5W recovering from some of the most horrific accidents and conditions of war, what they're willing to do for us. So I just want to say thank you again for what you're doing in serving our country, and I would remind those rest of us who think of ourselves as Americans not to forget that and to thank the kids every single day. All right. Thank you very, very much. Mahalo. I'm not exactly sure how to spell that, but it means the same thing in New Hampshire. We're wicked proud to be part of this event.